Elon Musk is so rich that if you turned his entire net worth into a single rope made of $100 bills, it wouldn't just stretch into space, it would be long enough to wrap around our planet not once, not twice, not even 10 times, but an unbelievable 28 times. By the time I finished saying all that, Elon Musk had probably made another $100,000, more than what many Americans earn in an entire year. But here's the crazy part. Despite all that wealth, Elon isn't even the richest person in history. History has seen people so unimaginably rich that Elon would look almost broke by comparison. So who was the richest person in history? Let's find out. Let's start back in the 1980s. Colombian billionaire Pablo Escobar didn't exactly revolutionize the energy supplement industry. At his peak, this guy was supplying 80% of the world's motivation powder and pulling in $420 million every single week. But if you adjust his net worth for inflation, it lands around $80 billion. On paper, that's actually less than Elon. But the real comparison is way more interesting than that. Pablo's net worth wasn't tied up in company stock or equity. He literally had it in cash. He spent $800 a week just on rubber bands to hold his stacks of money together. And every single year, about $2 billion of his cash was straight up ruined and lost to rot and rats. So maybe Pablo wasn't the richest man in history, but if we're talking pure physical cash on hand, Pablo was the richest. Now let's jump to 1945. World War II had just ended. Millions of American soldiers were heading back home. They were returning to a blue-collar economy where a single income could support an entire family. The American dream was still very much alive. So what was happening in the rest of the world? Right in the middle of all that rubble, we find one of the most powerful and richest men in history, Joseph Stalin. This guy was the communist leader of the Soviet Union, which is today's Russia, and he genuinely could not have cared less about money. His whole world was pipes and books, nothing else mattered to him. Yeah, compared to the average person, he was doing pretty well. He had food on the table while regular citizens were literally starving.
And according to his own daughter,
Stalin never spent a single ruble of his salary. He didn't even bother looking at it. Makes you wonder. So Stalin was considered one of the richest men in the world, even though he practically had zero money. You know why? Because he never needed money. He owned an entire country. You couldn't even crack a joke about the guy in private. If word got back to him, you were saying good morning to a firing squad. So on paper, Stalin was broke, but he controlled an entire economy that today would be worth close to $10 trillion. So here's the thing. If we're trying to find the richest man in history, we can't just look at money. We have to look beyond it. Everyone in this video represents a different era, and everyone's wealth comes in a completely different form. Some had political power, some had cash, some had a company, some had equity, and at the end, only one gets crowned, the richest man in history. Now let's move on to our next contender. In 1909, Adolf Hitler was homeless. He'd come to Vienna chasing a dream of becoming an artist, but nothing was working out. Art school rejected him, so he sold small paintings just to afford a place in a hostel. Then, after fighting in World War I and gaining a bit of influence, he tried to overthrow the government and landed himself 9 months in prison. Hopefully he used those 9 months to self-reflect, practice some self-care, try to improve himself, become a better artist. Instead, he wrote Mein Kampf. At first, the book didn't sell at all, but as Germany's situation got worse, demand for the book kept climbing, and by the time Hitler took power in 1933, the book was everywhere. And by this point, Hitler had figured out he basically leveled up from hacker to full-blown developer. So he ordered the government to buy 6 million copies of his own book, and on top of that, he dodged taxes and pocketed another $2 million. Then came his next move, copywriting his own image, so that anywhere his photo was used, he'd collect royalties. After that, he copyrighted his own speeches too, so any newspaper that printed them had to pay him for it. Between all these little side hustles, Hitler became a millionaire. But between 1933 and 1944, Hitler had another side hustle going. He received close to $5 billion in donations from his supporters. But Hitler's real wealth wasn't his money, it was his military. By around 1942, Germany controlled nearly all of Europe, and they looted hundreds of billions in wealth. Adjusted to today's value, Hitler was effectively controlling a $3 trillion empire. Henry Ford. Henry Ford pulled off a revolution. If you pay your workers more and let them rest more, your workforce won't go on strike. In 1940, Ford decided to raise his workers' pay from $2 to $5 a day, and he cut the work week from 6 days down to 5. Inspired by meat processing lines, Ford introduced the assembly line system, and the result? Building a Ford Model T went from 12 hours down to just 90 minutes, and the price dropped from $850 down to around $260. For the next 50 years, the Model T stayed the best-selling car in history. But Ford's biggest invention wasn't the Model T or the assembly line. Here's what actually happened. Once cars became affordable for everyone, people started moving out of the cities. They'd live out there, commute in for work every day, and drive back home. The rest of the world copied Ford's mass production model. Suburbs, communities, the modern work schedule, all of that became popular because of Henry Ford. That's why a lot of people consider Henry Ford the inventor of the middle class. And his $200 billion empire puts him among the richest people in the world. But Ford's success would never have been possible without one man before him. It's the late 1800s. The telephone, the telegraph, the light bulb, everything's being invented left and right. Pollution is basically being invented right alongside it. Work-life balance didn't exist. The stage was set for maximum capitalism. Three men ruled this era. First, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the king of the American railroad industry. When he died, he had more money than the entire GDP of some countries today. Second, Andrew Carnegie. He built his fortune in steel and spent the rest of his life on philanthropy. Genuinely a pretty decent guy. And third, the richest of them all, John D. Rockefeller. In 1870, John founded Standard Oil, and through a mix of innovation and some seriously shady moves, he crushed nearly all of his competitors. By 1880, he controlled 90% of America's oil refineries. But then came his downfall. In 1911, the US Supreme Court declared Standard Oil an illegal monopoly and broke it apart. The company got split into 34 separate companies, and this decision completely destroyed Rockefeller. He died poor. Just kidding, he owned shares in every single one of those companies, so he actually got even richer. And it was after this very breakup that John D. Rockefeller became the world's first billionaire. At his peak in 1913, he was worth roughly 2% of America's entire GDP. Adjusted for today, his net worth would be somewhere around $400 to $500 billion. But before all three of these men, there was a family that was bankrolling entire empires. The year is 1744. The average person is only living to about 30 years old. Cities are filthy, electricity doesn't exist, and into a small Jewish family, a boy is born, Meyer Amschel Rothschild. He started working from a young age. He went from coin dealer to successful banker, and in the early 1800s, he launched his biggest move yet. He sent his 5 sons to 5 different financial centers across Europe. Each son ran his own operation flawlessly. Before the telephone was even invented, the Rothschilds had already built an entire banking network across Europe. They financed wars. They financed massive projects like the Suez Canal. They even loaned money to entire countries. But the Rothschilds' biggest problem was that at the time, Jews weren't allowed to own land in a lot of places across Europe. They were banned from it in many regions. So for survival, the Rothschilds invested in stocks, in bonds, not in land or gold, things anyone could just come and seize. And to keep the family fortune inside the family, they used the cousin method, marry within the family. The reality is, today on the Forbes Rich List, you'll only find one Rothschild, Jeff Rothschild, whose net worth is around $3.2 billion, and he's not even from the original Rothschild bloodline. The real Rothschilds don't have a centralized family fortune anymore, but if we're talking about their peak, they were one of the richest families in history, and the richest of them all, Nathan Rothschild. Based on my sources, his net worth today would be around $20 billion, but to actually find the richest person in history, we might need to go back even further. The year is 1324. In Africa, a man sets out on a pilgrimage. His name, Mansa Musa. He was the king of the Mali Empire. On his road trip, Musa covered himself, his 60,000 soldiers, and even their animals in thousands of pounds of gold. And he gave all that gold away to people along the way to stabilize the economy. Then, on his way back, he bought all the gold back. Problem temporarily solved, but the moment everyone tried to cash in their repayments at once, the economy crashed again. After his multi-billion-dollar road trip, Mansa Musa started showing up on maps drawn in gold, and he's been called history's original flexer. But calculating his actual net worth is nearly impossible, because all the records about him come from secondhand sources. No official record exists. A lot of people believe that at the time, Musa controlled 50% of the world's gold supply, and the most common estimate I found was $400 billion. Now let's go back just 100 more years from there, and we find a man whose wealth was a completely different kind altogether. In the early 1200s, Genghis Khan controlled so much land that no one else in human history has ever ruled over more territory than he did. The Mongol Empire stretched across nearly 20% of Earth's total land area. Adjusted to today's value, his estimated net worth would be around $130 trillion.
But here's the catch.
Technically, that wealth was never really his. After winning a war, Khan didn't keep the loot or the land for himself. He gave it all all away to his soldiers to keep them loyal. Genghis Khan was never interested in personal wealth. He just genuinely enjoyed helping people meet their ancestors early. And because he controlled so much land, a lot of people consider him the richest man to ever live. So who's actually the richest man in history? Looking at this chart, it seems like a lot of these guys make Elon look broke, but the numbers don't tell the whole story. Hear me out. In 1913, John D. Rockefeller was worth 2% of the US GDP, and today, Elon Musk is worth around 2.13% of the US GDPs. But here's the real twist. Today's US economy is about 22 times bigger than it was in 1913. Rockefeller had a big piece of a small cake. Elon Musk is the biggest fish in the biggest lake there's ever been. His net worth is entirely, completely his own. He can do whatever he wants with it, unlike the dictators and heads of state on this list. And he has access to technology that would look like literal black magic to every other person on this list. So Elon Musk is the richest man in history. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. And if you're wondering who actually owns Spider-Man, Marvel, or Sony, check out this video next. Until then, bye!